all of MAGA was against this. You can never go broke betting on the continuity of bipartisan U.S. foreign policy, no matter what the election outcomes are. And I think this Trump second term is proving that more and more.
So recently, Glenn Greenwald had a podcast about Trump's recent decision to effectively reverse a decision a few days ago and decide to continue arming Ukraine beyond the bounds of what he was required to under law. Glenn explains how this is a complete betrayal of his MAGA base, which didn't support this at all, and the ramifications this has on U.S. foreign policy and the prospect of peace in Ukraine anytime soon. So Glenn's one of the best journalists in the world, so let's get his take. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
One of the other main issues that had united and defined and shaped the Trump movement over the last 4 years was a very strong, close to unified and unanimous opposition among MAGA populists to the Biden administration's policy of arming and financing Ukraine in its war against Russia. I had many MAGA influencers and pundits. I had members of Congress who are MAGA on my show. And one after the next, they all vehemently denounced U.S. funding and arming of the war in Ukraine, arguing it was futile. It's not our war. It's not our business. We have to use our resources to take care of our own people at home. That's what America First was. And President Trump was highly critical of that Biden policy, on top of which he repeatedly promised he would get a deal done. Not, I'm going to try and get a deal done. He said, I'll solve it in 24 hours, even if that was a little hyperbolic, as he now claims. He's had 4 months, 5 months. He's not even close to getting it done. And a lot of people were saying, when he kept saying, I'm going to get it done in 24 hours, they kept saying, Putin's not going to just sign whatever deal you tell him to. He's winning the war. They've spent enormous amounts of money, lost tens of thousands, if not more, Russian lives in pursuit of a war that they believe is in their existential interest to win.
Yeah, Glenn's exactly right. This was a big focal point of Trump's campaign, perhaps a top 3 topic in which he was campaigning on, because Biden had continued to shovel money into the coffers of Ukraine. Remember, in Trump's first presidency, he did end up supporting funding to Ukraine after being threatened with impeachment by the Congress over it. It was to the tune of about $400 million. It included the javelins. He later boasted about giving them the anti-tank javelins, by the way, as of even a few months ago. But he ultimately caved in that. He got impeached anyways, by the way. But Biden really doubled down on this policy after Putin's invasion, which came in, I believe, about the 8th year of the war in Ukraine, which started in 2014, not 2022, by the way. So that's where we stand. Trump, the charlatan, had campaigned against arming Ukraine, getting U.S. presence out of there, essentially stopping the killing. That was good rhetoric he used. Well, this decision is going to continue the killing. And again, this is another situation like the whole Epstein debacle that shows that the old guard is the same as the new guard, and the new guard is the same as the old guard. What do you know?
They're going to just give up because you tell them to. And he was like, no, they will. Now, just at the beginning of this month, we were told that the Trump administration was going to pause sending munitions and other missiles to Ukraine because the U.S. doesn't have them to give. We're low in our own stockpiles. Yeah. In part because we've sent so much to Ukraine, we've sent so much to Israel. We use them to protect Israel from ballistic missiles sent by Iran. We've used them to bomb Yemen for whatever reason for a full month. We just don't have it to give, we were told. And as a result, Politico, July 1st, this is last week, U.S. pauses some munitions shipments to Ukraine, including air defense missiles. Senior White House official says, quote, the Pentagon has halted shipments of some air defense missiles and other precision munitions to Ukraine due to worries the U.S. weapons stockpiles have fallen too low. The decision was driven by the Pentagon's policy chief, Elbridge Colby, and was made after a review of Pentagon munitions stockpiles, leading to concerns that the total number of artillery rounds, air defense missiles, and precision missile munitions was shrinking. According to 3 people familiar with the issue, White House Deputy Press Secretary Anna Kelly said in a statement the decision was, quote, made to put America's interests first, following a DoD review of our nation's military support and assistance to other countries across the globe. The strength of the United States Armed Forces remains unquestioned. Just ask Iran. Just ask Iran if you have any doubts. They do she went on, they do want to have the anti-missile missiles, as they call them, and we're going to see if we can make some available, Trump said at a news conference at the end of the NATO summit in The Hague on Wednesday. Quote, they are very hard to get. So this is what we were told. And remember, we did reporting on this as well during, right after Trump negotiated the ceasefire between Iran and Israel, that basically Israel needed this war to end. Israel's own air defense system was going down to zero. Iran's missiles were getting through at a much higher rate. They were not even sending that many missiles, and yet there was all kinds of contact and impact and destruction. Trump himself said Israel was getting pounded, especially in the last several days. And the U.S. didn't have any to give them. They didn't have any to replenish. The U.S. was running out of its own missiles to protect Israel, and so Israel needed an end to this war. I know we all believe that it was a great triumph. The United States and Iran and Israel kicked Iran's ass. We pounded them. We won. That's always war propaganda. I remember growing up, I was told the U.S. never lost a war in its history.
Yeah, that's right. And this, I would say, is a stunning reversal. But at this point, it's sad, but it's not even stunning because there is precedent for Trump withdrawing funding from Ukraine only to reverse that decision just days later. This happened back in, I believe, March when Zelensky went to the White House, made a fool of himself, acted entitled to the U.S. Treasury, questioned J.D. Vance's views in relation to the Maidan coup, etc. And that blew up. It became a huge media spectacle. Lots of coverage and videos and clips came out of that. And he halted funding, but for 6 days. And why did he restore it? A fruitless potential ceasefire that Russia was never going to accept, and this absurd minerals deal that depended on the Donbass territory that Russia occupies. So this was just preposterous, but this recent reversal really repeats that in several ways because you had the Elbridge Colby decision. And by the way, Elbridge Colby is by far one of the best people in this administration. He is not a neocon hawk, one of the only few that isn't. And it was a good decision to restrict arms flows to Ukraine. That's what, again, this is a big reason why people supported Trump. And now you have Trump going back on this and saying, hey, we're going to keep the weapons flowing to Ukraine, going back on all of his promises and the hopes and aspirations of many of the people that supported him.
And I was hearing this after the Vietnam War. So this stockpile depletion is very real. NBC News, July 4th, just 4 days ago. Pete Hegseth halted weapons for Ukraine despite a military analysis that the aid wouldn't jeopardize U.S. readiness. Quote, the Defense Department held up a shipment of U.S. weapons for Ukraine this week over what officials said were concerns about its low stockpiles. But an analysis by senior military officers found that the aid package would not jeopardize the American military's own ammunition supplies, according to 3 U.S. officials. The move to halt the weapons shipment blindsided the State Department, members of Congress, officials in Kiev, and European allies, according to multiple sources with knowledge of the matter. Suspending the shipment of military aid to Ukraine was a unilateral step by Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, according to 3 congressional aides and a former U.S. official familiar with the matter. All anonymous sources just backbiting one another. Elbridge Colby said, we did a review of our stockpile. It's way too low to be able to risk sending more to Ukraine. We don't have it. Pete Hegseth made that same decision. The White House confirmed it. And then a bunch of anonymous cowards inside the Pentagon who obviously want the U.S. to continue its bipartisan Biden-Trump policy of arming Ukraine ran to NBC and was like, yeah, that's not true. We can send them all the missiles they want. It doesn't threaten our stockpile. Everyone's anonymous in this article. Quote, it was the 3rd time Hegseth on his own has stopped shipments of aid to Ukraine, the sources said. In the 2 previous cases in February and in May, his actions were reversed days later. Here is Trump at the White House yesterday.
Oh, great.
Again, with Netanyahu, as always, 3rd time, 5 months that Netanyahu has visited the U.S. No other world leader has visited twice. This is Netanyahu's 3rd trip.
Of course, he's the real U.S. president. You got to allow the president to go to the White House, right? That's what you have to do once they're in town. They can't spend all of their power in the Middle East. Some of it has to be in the United States.
And here is what Trump said when asked about Ukraine.
Are you planning to send more weapons to Ukraine?
We're going to send some more weapons. We have to. They have to be able to defend themselves. They're getting hit very hard now.
Do you notice right now, John Ratcliffe, the CIA director, lets out a sigh of relief and a huge smile right here? This is the Trump administration. Remember, Trump campaigned on ending this war and ending the killing. What's going to inspire more killing? Status quo in the trenches where the Donbass territory, essentially the occupation, hasn't really changed for the most part in years. There hasn't been a significant Ukrainian offensive in a year, and that was pushed back by early 2025. And Ratcliffe is smiling. These are who these people are. John Ratcliffe, that is right. These people are vile to keep this thing going. Americans don't want it. They literally campaign on America first. This is America last to the core. And I don't see how you can support this, even if you're a diehard Trump supporter. Same with the Epstein story. Same with the Doge fiasco. There's nothing that he's delivered in accordance to his best campaign promises. So why does he compel your support anymore? He doesn't. This is status quo Biden policy to the core.
They're getting hit very hard. We're going to have to send more weapons. Yeah, defensive weapons primarily, but they're getting hit very, very hard. So many people are dying in that mess.
Now, so ironically, revealing what Fox News is, let's go back to that, please. The graphic, the on-screen graphic, the whole time Trump was speaking was Netanyahu nominates Trump for Nobel Peace Prize. And it just stays up the whole time. So you have one leader, an Israeli leader, who has completely destroyed civilian life in Gaza, killing tens of thousands of children and other innocent people by huge amounts with the goal of ethnically cleansing Gaza, as they're now being explicit. And you have another president, the one in the United States, who, like his predecessor, Joe Biden, has been paying for what the overwhelming consensus of human rights groups around the world say is a genocide. And Fox News has the audacity to say he's been nominated, Trump has, for a Nobel Peace Prize. There's no such thing as a nomination for a Nobel Peace Prize. I believe it was a National Review writer. I think it might have even been Jonah Goldberg, who used to put in his bio, nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize or something like that. Anyone can nominate anyone. It's completely meaningless. It's not a thing. It's not like being nominated for an Academy Award.
Yeah, this is the ultimate irony, too, is that they're going to have that ticker up the whole time. I actually didn't notice that. I was looking at Ratcliffe, that villain. But they have this ticker saying Netanyahu nominates Trump for a Nobel Peace Prize, and Netanyahu is sitting there, a war criminal in his own right, for the genocide in Gaza that the U.S. is bankrolling, that Trump is, basically made excuses for his entire term, called Netanyahu a war hero just days ago on Truth Social, and he's talking about rearming Ukraine to continue a war that's led to the death of over 1 million people at this point, which many sides believe. There's many different statistics about the total number of deaths, but a lot of them are north of 1 million people at this point. Total casualties, plus deaths and casualties included. So that's where we're at here, is that, the irony is lost on no one that actually sees this ticker, and Glenn's pointing out the right thing here.
Where the Academy picks the 5 top actors, but you don't win, so you're like, oh, I was nominated. That's not how this works. But Netanyahu knows he can flatter Trump and get whatever he wants. So he comes with the letter saying, Mr. President, I've nominated you for the Nobel Peace Prize. And Trump's like, oh, like it's so important. And then Fox News acts like it's some huge accomplishment. It's like state TV to an insane level. But also, the whole time that's on there, Trump is talking about arming Ukraine so they can continue this war.
Right.
And yeah, defensive weapons is what he's saying, although not only defensive weapons, but that was the Biden administration policy as well. Here's the next part of this where Trump is again asked about Ukraine, and this is what he says.
Mr. President, you have sent more weapons to Ukraine, as you said last night. Last week, the Pentagon paused some shipments of weapons to Ukraine. Did you approve of that pause?
We want to put defensive weapons because Putin is not treating human beings right.
Notice he didn't answer the actual question. He just goes with what the justification is that Biden used too. This is indistinguishable from that justification.
Killing too many people. So we're sending some defensive weapons to Ukraine, and I've approved that.
So who ordered the pause last week?
I don't know. What did you tell me?
So Trump's basically saying, I didn't know anything about this pause. I didn't do it. I just want to pause for a second on the dark and sick irony that Donald Trump is accusing Putin of killing too many civilians while he's sitting across the table from his extremely good friend and close ally whom he loves, Benjamin Netanyahu, who has killed infinitely more innocent people in Gaza with the U.S. paying for it and the U.S. arming it and the U.S. protecting it under 2 consecutive presidents, one a Democrat, one a Republican.
Yeah, the brutality and evil of the war regime and the U.S. ties to Israel and their war aims and their genocide aims in Gaza cannot escape our sensibilities at this point. This is absolutely outrageous. And the irony is beyond what we saw in that ticker. He's talking about this and about the number of people that Putin has killed sitting across from Netanyahu. It's absolutely bogus. And he's continued to double down on his support for Netanyahu, pled with the Knesset to drop corruption and fraud charges, which, by the way, Netanyahu probably would have gone down for had October 7th not occurred. And by the way, Mossad knew it was going to occur for about a year in advance, something that mainstream journalistic publications in Israel printed. But it happened anyways, but we'll just leave that alone for now, I guess. But yeah, this is sick and twisted.
And Putin isn't treating human life well. And that's why Putin is this bad person who means that Trump has to now continue the Biden policy that he said for so long he opposed of arming Ukraine. Did he just discover this? That people in Ukraine are getting killed as a result of this war? Is that like a new thing he just found out in the last few days that made him do a 180 and now want to send weapons and arm the Ukrainians? Here's more of Trump explaining this policy reversal.
That was a war that should have never happened, and a lot of people are dying, and it should end. And I don't know, we get a lot of bullshit thrown at us by Putin for you want to know the truth. He's very nice all the time, but it turns out to be meaningless.
Do you want to sanction him? Lindsey Graham has a sanctions bill on Russia. Do you want him to move
I'm
ahead with
looking
that?
at it, yeah. No, I'm looking. The Senate is passed a very, very tough sanctions bill. Yeah, I'm looking at it.
Can you sign that?
It's an optional bill. It's totally at my option. They passed it totally at my option and to terminate totally at my option. And I'm looking at it very strongly.
Yeah. Let's just get a load of this. This is literally indistinguishable from the Biden regime, which sanctioned up Russia to the core. Trump looking to expand upon that. He's saying that this war is due to Biden's weakness. He said that several times. But he's literally emulating Biden's policies, or the deep state policies, because let's be real, the deep state was probably running the entirety of the war regime under Biden. But Trump's just doing the same thing. He's doubling down on it, using the same rhetoric toward Putin that CNN did, and that Harris did, and that Biden did, and that all these pro-NATO people agitating for more money to Ukraine used. He's right, that is a war that shouldn't have started. But it's not because of what happened in 2022. Or even 2024, you can say that, or 2014, you can say that because, yeah, the U.S. overthrew the democratically elected government that was headed by Yanukovych that year. It piped in money via U.S. aid, which thankfully is mostly dismantled now, to the tune of several $billion. Up to $5 billion was sent to Ukraine. It's unclear about how much was used to, bring in rock shows and keep those protests going in the fiercest and coldest months of the winter in Ukraine. But nonetheless, that happened. But even preceding that were there were several waves of NATO expansion that had begun in the 1990s after James Baker sat at a table across from Gorbachev and said, "You have it on my honor, we won't move NATO 1 inch to the east." And, lots of these pro-Ukrainian people, pro-NATO people that want us to keep dumping money into NATO and dumping money into Ukraine say, that was never in the actual treaty. It wasn't in the writing of the treaty, but neither was the fact that both countries wouldn't bomb each other, that wouldn't nuke each other. The U.S., isn't obligated not to nuke Russia either, but that doesn't make it in the treaty. But the point is that was a promise made, and that promise is supported by notes and minutes that were taken during that conference that show it was corroborated by the German official that was a delegate there as well, serving as an ambassador and subordinate to Hans Dietrich Genscher. And that was a guy named Jürgen Krobach. Jürgen Krobach said that, we're not going to move this alliance into the east so countries like Poland cannot join up. And that's where we're at. We're in this war because of weakness, that's true, but it's weakness in its tendency to expand the American empire and the European arm of that, which is NATO and NATO expansion.
I mean, again, this idea that, Putin spouts a lot of bullshit in Trump's words, he's very nice to me, but it's meaningless, he can't be trusted. This is what all the people who favored arming Ukraine all these years were telling Trump.
Yeah.
Putin's a bad guy, he can't be trusted, he wants this war, he doesn't value human life, we have to protect the Ukrainians. All of MAGA was against this. And then Trump gets into office and he starts talking like Michael McFaul or Ann Applebaum or David Frum.
Yeah.
You could give Trump a New York, an Atlantic article, an Atlantic column with him saying this stuff about Ukraine, he would fit right in.
Yeah, actually, neocons are cheering this right now on Twitter, by the way. They're complimenting Trump for doing this, if that tells you anything. The people that have wanted this war to continue forever, endlessly, with the goal of somehow reclaiming that territory, or even more ambitiously and more utopian, thinking that a Russian regime change is on the table here. Just these absurd-minded people that have no sense of reality. That's who's cheering for this right now. The neocons are decidedly on the side of Trump over this. It's incredible.
J.D. Vance said pouring weapons into Ukraine is not a strategy. And this is something they pounded Biden on, and that Trump promised to end when he was campaigning. And now Trump, 5 months into office, like, you know what? Putin's not really trustworthy, I've discovered. And we're going to keep arming Ukraine. We have to.
By the way, I don't think any world leader is trustworthy, but that's a different subject than who the U.S. should dump billions of dollars into the coffers of. That's a completely different discussion. And my answer to the latter is no one, no leader. America First involves America first, our domestic concerns. And yeah, there's a lot of people with a lot of different ideas on how to handle domestic concerns and address domestic issues. But none of them include dumping money into Ukraine. Just continuing that money flow, continuing that status quo war in a way that Afghanistan continued for over 20 years. And Julian Assange put it best when he said in relation to Afghanistan that they don't want a successful war. They want an endless war. And we're seeing them employ that same thing in Ukraine. And it crosses administrations and, left-right paradigm divides completely. It's the uniparty. It's the war machine. It's the war regime, and they have no particular color. It occurs and exists irrespective of blue and red and left and right.
And the slight pause that the Pentagon announced on the ground said, we're running out of our own weapons. We can't keep arming Ukraine and Israel because we're running out of our own. Trump said, that's not me who did that. I don't agree with that. I think we have to keep sending weapons to Ukraine. And that's yet another policy of the Biden administration, which the Trump administration is continuing. And as Michael Tracy once observed recently, a couple months ago, maybe, I think it was when Trump announced that he was restarting Biden's bombing campaign in Yemen, Michael Tracy said, you can never go broke betting on the continuity of bipartisan U.S. foreign policy, no matter what the election outcomes are. And I think this Trump second term is proving that more and more.
Absolutely. Michael Tracy's totally right about that. And so is Glenn. Excellent piece here that really goes into some of the history of this. But, Trump speaks out of both sides of his mouth. His campaign rhetoric was good. Once he's in power, he does the same thing as Biden. Are his top supporters criticizing this? Not really. Not even to the extent that some of them are criticizing the Epstein thing, which is also a debacle. But anti-war dissidents have no reason to support this guy anymore. And I don't even have to tell you that. I know people watching this realize that at this point. But really, out of all the theaters I thought had a chance to really be ended some months into Trump's presidency, between Yemen and the genocide in Gaza and, the Syria issue, which that culminated at the end of Biden's term really with regime change finally, or Ukraine? I really thought Ukraine. I really thought that Trump had the political capital to actually maybe get out of this thing. Maybe that was being too optimistic on my part. But, you know, we're seeing the same policies continue. No sense on how long this war is going to continue. But, you know, we've seen basically every strategy used by Zelensky to drum up the marketing and propaganda campaign for world leaders to keep sending him money. The stupid PR stunt that they did to bomb Russian nuclear bombers and do effectively nothing just to try to send a signal that they are still in this thing, despite the fact that they've lost like 90% of the Donbass, which Russia occupies, in Luhansk and Donetsk and Zaporizhia and Kherson. That hasn't changed. Nothing's changed, and nothing will be changed by all the sanctions that the Washington regime throws at Russia or the amount of weapons that they throw at Ukraine. That's the truth. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you think that war will continue for more years in Ukraine? How long do you think it will go? Is Glenn right? What is this going to do to the MAGA base? Will they push back at Trump for this at all? Let me know down below in the comments. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to Glenn Greenwald too. He's amazing, one of the best journalists of our age. And please consider becoming a YouTube member by clicking the join button below. You'll support me financially, which I very much appreciate if you go to that length. But by doing that, you'll also gain access to view all my videos in advance of their general public release on YouTube. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.